And welcome back. Now that we have Redux and React Redux installed, let's start writing some code and implementing Redux. Now, the first thing we want to do is create something called an action and also a reducer. If you remember this diagram, we mentioned that Redux has these two components, an action and a reducer. So we're going to build those two out and show you what I mean. The first thing we want to do is create a new file. Let's just keep it in the source folder. And we'll say that this will be called actions.js. And within here, we're going to create an action using just plain old JavaScript. We're going to say that export const, and the first action we're going to do is the search field. So remember, when we type into the search box, we can filter the robots. We'll say that that action, which is on search change that we had in the React app, we'll say that this is going to be called set search field. And this search field will receive an input of text, which the user types. And because we want to keep this as small as possible, we can actually wrap it in curly brackets so that we can avoid the return statement. We're just returning an object, and this object is going to have a type called, let's say, change search field. And we'll also have a payload called text. So that is, this action is going to, which is called set search field, is going to take text, which is what the user inputs, and it's going to return an object that has a type of change search field. So that's the action that's being taken, and it's going to send. And payload is a common name that is used in Redux, so just get used to that. Payload is we're sending whatever data is needed to go on to the reducer, which is just going to be whatever the user enters. All right, we just created our action. That's it. That's our action. Nice and simple. Now, in here, I've capitalized this because it's a constant, and a constant is usually capitalized, all caps in JavaScript is just the standard. But I like using an actual constant variable because with just a string, we can misspell something and we might not get the error. But if we use a variable and we misspell it, we'll actually get an error when we're running the app. So it's a nice little nifty trick, and most Redux demos have a constant file as well, where they keep track of all these actions. And it's also nice to have a file where you can see what your actions are line by line, because most apps will have more than just one action, as you'll see. So let's create a new file, and we'll call it constants.js. And within here, we can just export. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see. There you go. We're going to export constant change search field, and that's going to equal our string. Again, this is the exact same thing, change search field, but the string. Seems a little bit redundant, but it's just good practice to have. So now that we have this variable, which is a constant, and because we're exporting it, we can just import it up over here. And we'll say change search field. Make sure that there's no spelling errors this way. And we'll say that import from the constants file. And let's make this a little bit smaller, just so everything fits in. And there you go. So now we can use the change search field instead of the text. And there you go. we have a nice and good looking actions file with the set search field action. And you can imagine here, as we get more and more actions, we can keep adding things and we can keep adding all the constants that we need for the actions that our app takes. All right, the next thing that we remember with Redux is after the action, we also have a reducer, which I said is a big function that just reads the action and spits out what we call state. So let's do that. Let's create another file here. We'll call it reducers.js. And within here, let's create that reducer. We first start off by saying const initial state. So we need some sort of a start point. So remember in our app.js file with create React app, if I open that up, we see that we have initial state with search field that is blank. So similar to that, we need to say that the initial state here is going to have the search field that is equal to an empty string. So that's the initial state. That's the initial object that we'll have in the Redux store. And now we need to create the reducer. Again, remember, it's a function. That's very easy to do. Again, because we're going to use it in other places, we're going to export it. And we'll say that this is going to be called a search robots, because that's the action that's taking. It's going to search the robots using the search field. So this search robots reducer will take in a few things. First is a state, which is the state of our application. And then the second thing is the action. So that is what action just happened. And using ES6, let's just give it default parameters to make sure that if this is empty or action is empty, we're not getting an error. So we'll say that state will be the initial state, which is what we have up here. And then action is just going to be an empty object. Remember, our actions are just objects that we're returning. So from here, using arrow functions, we have our first reducer. And reducers here, what they do is they get this input of a state and an action. And if they care about the action that they receive, in our case, if we receive any actions that are related to searching robots, we're going to do something. We're going to act upon the state. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use a switch statement. And we're going to say within this switch statement that we're going to do an action.type. And remember, action.type, that's something that we use in the action.js file. Remember, we have a type of change search field. So looking at this, it looks like we're going to care about the change search field action type. So let's just import the constants file up over here for Reduxes or for our reducer as well. And within here, we can say that if the case that the action type, let's just do change search field. If that's the case, well, we want to return a new state. And this goes back to the three principles that we talked about. Let's have a look. The three principles in React is that we have the single source of truth, that is the one big object that describes our app. So we have our initial state variable that we've set. State is read-only. That means we can never modify that object. The only thing we can do is create a new object that has the same as before, the previous object, the previous state that we had, with whatever modifications we had. So state is read-only. And then the third thing is that changes only using pure functions. And remember, pure functions are functions that get some sort of an input, just like we have in our reducer, and return an output that doesn't have any side effects. That is, it doesn't modify anything. Every time we enter an input, it always gives out the same output. So based on these principles, if we go back, we know that we want this reducer to be a pure function. That is, it's taking some sort of an input and it should return a new state. And the way we do that without just doing state dot search field and modifying that property, we're going to do object dot assign. And the way we do this is curly brackets, comma, the state that we're receiving, which is the initial state this time. And then finally, whatever we want to change in that object. In our case, we're interested in changing the search field property, and the search field property is going to have the action dot payload. Again, let me just make this a little bit smaller. We're returning a new state, as you can see here with object.assign. That's going to have everything in the state, plus we're going to update whatever search field property, new search field property we have with action.payload. Remember, actions have two things that we're sending, an object with type and an object with payload. If we go back, we see type and payload. So this is simply saying we received an action called change search field. If that's the case, then return the new state with action.payload, whatever the user has entered. I know it can get a little bit confusing, but this is just standard Redux syntax that you'll just have to get used to. Just a heads up, there's another way of doing this that some people like and it's cleaner. Another option is to do object destructuring or object spread operator, which means we can do something like this, which works nicely as well. For now though, let's just keep it the way we add. And then always remember that a pure function always needs to return something. So in case that the action type is not this, we also want to say default to always just return state. There you go. We've created a reducer that is a pure function. Now here we could use an if statement if we want, but I like using switch, and React documentation also recommends switch because you can have multiple cases, multiple actions that act upon the search robots reducer, and it's a lot easier to just add on different things that affect the state of the robots. All right, that wasn't too bad, right? We've created a reducer with some initial state, and we also have our constants and actions. So that diagram that I showed you is starting to make a little bit more sense. In the next video, let's actually connect these, because right now it's not connected to anything. It's not connected to our apps, to our React app. We've just created these files that kind of live on their own. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.